Okay, speaker's meaning. I'm going to tell you a little story about it. And I have to tell you, it took me a while to be able to explain it this way. And you also need to understand I'm not going to get it right. Okay, I'm not going to get it right. I'm going to approximate it. But you really need to read Owen Barfield, because the guy is not only a very exact and precise thinker who's modeled his thinking on the inspiration of Rudolf Steiner through such books as this. He's gotten very good at it. He's very, very subtle. And the argument that's in here that I'm going to present to you is very, very subtly wrought, very, very carefully. And when I give the precis of it, my own sort of version of it, I'm not going to get it quite the way he did it. So as much as I'd like to be able to suggest that you don't have to spend any money for books, I think this is a book you want to know and buy. In the same way with this one, you know. If you want to do real anthroposophy, get those books. This you can get online, and this you can get online. You don't have to buy them. Okay? Fat-free. Now, let's step back a minute and make a context. Now remember when we talked earlier about the Second Coming and how the opponents had managed to obscure the whole situation of the Second Coming by fostering among religious fundamentalists of a Christian type these really absurd notions that make people who are thinking people roll their eyes. Oh my God, you know, the new atheists are getting a lot of play in the press, and people are paying a lot of attention to them. And I encounter them online. They come around and they want to talk, and it's really hard to divorce them from the ideas that they have. And this is one of the things that anthroposophists need to understand. They need to understand the world in which we live and move, and the point that anthroposophy wants to contribute to the future evolution of humanity through the development of these mysteries, the mystery of thinking, and also the community mystery, which is a little bit different and involves the reverse cultist, but we'll talk about that at another time. In any event, one of the other things that's part of this, part and parcel of this problem of roll your eyes problem of the Second Coming and all the rest of that, is the conflicting dialogue between the Christian creationists, you might say, and people who believe in the evolution of Darwinian evolution. Now those are tricky things, you know. There's a big debate going on there, and at the center of the debate, in a kind of social way, are a lot of people who are becoming part of the community of new atheists who say, yuck! You know, remember what I said earlier about Steiner saying that the world would be a better place with materialists who thought than anthroposophists who didn't? There are a lot of thinking materialists, and just because they have materialist idea is no reason to kind of go, no, I can't have anything to do with you. In fact, there needs to be a lot of intercourse between people who are developing in themselves real anthroposophy and the world of the new atheists. We have a lot to talk about. Anyway, part of this is Darwinian evolution, and that's a very big idea. It's sort of taken over the whole picture of the past. Now, earlier I said about Owen Barfield that he talked about something called the assumption, which is that there exists an evolution of consciousness, and once you ask that question, you realize that the assumption is totally invalid because all the evidence is otherwise. But nonetheless, we swim. The modern world swims in these ideas of the fact that there is no such thing as an evolution of consciousness, and everything is matter, and there is no spirit, and so on and so forth. And one of these ideas manifests itself quite clearly in Darwinian evolution. Now, it's possible to sort of come at that problem and deal with it in a very subtle fashion. Again, for free, remember fat-free, we're fat-free here in Real Anthroposophy. If you go to the internet and you look up Ron Brady and then Dogma and Doubt, you will come to an essay in which Ron Brady, who's crossed over, did a very interesting thing. He was a professor of philosophy, and he knew a lot about how one should think. Real anthroposophist. And he wrote about the problems of thinking and the manifestation of the ideas that we have of contemporary evolution. Why Darwin in a certain kind of way, why Darwinian evolution, in spite of all the efforts of all the biologists, is simply not good science. Now that's an important argument to understand, to bring into your own self-understanding. And also his article will wake you up to certain things that go on in your thinking. And why it's so important that in anthroposophy, and real anthroposophy, outside of what Dornock and the councils in America do, we need to be scientists. So read Ron Brady, Dogma Down. Now back to Barfield, who's a scientist of language. Very careful thinking about language. So what's his argument? Well, it goes like this. If you look at the history of languages, they develop in a certain kind of way. And in the beginning, the words that are created take on a certain shape. And they get this shape from the fact that they're the names of things. People have experiences and they give them names. This is a tree, this is a dog, I run, I eat, I do all this stuff. So languages have these names of things. And that's in the beginning of a language. In the middle of the development of a language, these things shift a little bit. People have a better understanding of things, and they maybe take a name and they do something with it that's a little bit different. So, for example, the words subject and object used to mean the opposite of what they do today. 250 years ago, they meant the opposite. You read Barfield and you get into all these kind of really trippy things about the changes of meaning. And then when you get into the maturity of the language, you get where language is metaphorical, which is also, he talks about in this book. Remember, he used the word metaphorical and poetical. So that one can, for example, say, take the word sunset and say, well, this event occurred in the sunset of Mr. Wendt's life. Now that's a metaphorical use of the word sunset, which begins as a name of something, an experience. The sunset, we have an experience, we call it a sunset. Right? Then it's applied metaphorically. Okay? So that's what language does. It starts with naming of things. It goes through this transitional phase in the middle where the naming gets more complicated and it's starting to bleed into metaphors, and then in the maturity of language is metaphorical. Okay, that's fine. All right. Now if you look at the history of ideas, which Barfield is so adept at, it's kind of frightening. You're going to learn more about the history of ideas reading Barfield than you would reading Steiner. Sorry to say. Steiner had to cover a whole lot of stuff. He couldn't do the special pieces that needed to be covered very carefully and elaborated on. He left a whole lot of work for people to do after he thought. Okay, so Barfield's done all this stuff with language. Anyway, so what do we know about history? Well, remember, he's going to talk about history in this book. Well, in history we could say we have present-day history, and then we have prehistory, and then we have the ages of myth. Now, what do we mean by difference between history and prehistory? Well, prehistory is a period in which there weren't any historians and they didn't have the idea of history. When there started to be historians and then we started to have the idea of history, we kind of invented the idea of history, we had stories. And a lot of the stories are the stories that we call now prehistory. And of course, if you go back and pay attention to prehistory, you'll find that the stories in prehistory have myths. Okay? And these myths are about the origin of humanity and the gods and that kind of stuff. Now I'm going to have to stop here because of time. Come back to this.